had some amazing times as a young man. Being the youngest of all the brothers, I was the one who had to go out and watch the sheep every day. Talk about boring. That's watching sheep graze and watching sheep graze and watching sheep graze. But it was also dangerous. There was one time a lion tried to come and take off one of the little lambs. And I took care of the lion. It was just amazing. God gave me strength and grace. And a bear, I did him in. Those were the days, but it was boring. And that's when I learned to play the harp. If I got tired of playing the harp, then I grabbed my slingshot and practiced with my slingshot. In fact, I even began to write songs and poetry. It was pretty boring and sometimes pretty exciting. One day I was out there just doing my shepherd duty. And one of my big brothers, they always picked on me because I was the youngest, came and said, "Dad's calling you to the house. Come, now." I didn't know why, but I got up and followed Big Brother. And I got to the house. And there was the prophet Samuel. And Samuel began to talk and he said, "It's you. You're the one that God has chosen to be the king." Me? I'm just a kid. He said, "This is an absolute secret." Now I was sent back to watch sheep. God was with me. I didn't understand it all, but I knew it. And our country was at war, and I heard about what was happening for my big brothers. And one day Dad sent me to the battle to take some food to my brothers. And while I was there, I heard the enemy's best and biggest and meanest army guys say insults about God and Israel. And something inside of me welled up, and I said, "Anybody that treats my God like that, I'm going to fight him." And they let me. And I grabbed my sling and 5 stones. And I guess maybe my faith wasn't quite big enough to just get one, but I grabbed 5, but I only needed 1. And I went out there and I killed this giant. Me, this kid, the giant killer. I went back to watching sheep. But the king wanted to honor me, and he brought me to the palace, and he heard that I played the harp, and I became a frequent visitor to play for the king. And while there, I started making eyes at McCall, that's the king's daughter, and she started making eyes at me. And she's a princess. She's in the palace, and I'm a dirty sheep herder. Who am I? But we fell in love. King wasn't happy. He wanted some political alliance, somebody important. And here's a sheep herder in my palace. So the king said, "Well, if you really want to marry her, then you have to go kill 100 Philistines to win my daughter's hand in marriage." And I did more than he asked. And we were married. Oh, it was so much fun. young and in love, living in a palace. But quite often the king would go into depression. I'd have to play on the harp to kind of calm his nerves, and sometimes his nerves weren't calm. And more than one occasion, my father-in-law tried to kill me. Maybe you felt that sometime, but he tried to kill me. I had to escape. McCall, because she loved me more than she loved her dad, she helped me. Oh, and finally the king was killed in battle. I became king. And one of the first things I did was, my love for God was so deep. Jehovah had been with me as a shepherd, and now as a king, and I wanted to honor Jehovah and the Ark of the Covenant, this special item that God had given us the design for, was stuck in somebody's house, and I wanted to bring it to Jerusalem. And so we made the plans, and on our second attempt, as we were arriving in Jerusalem, a multitude of people following the ark. And man, we got excited. We were celebrating and praising and singing to God, Jehovah Almighty. It was incredible, and I got hot. I took off my robes, and I was dancing in the street. And, well, a lot of the younger people, and especially the girls, started dancing with me. And, well, it was cool. But till I got home. And boy, did McCall get on my case. She accused me, and I accused her. She screamed at me, and I screamed at her. I told her that if she had been with me, it wouldn't have happened that way. And she said, a king shouldn't act like that. And boy, did that fight get ugly. She was screaming at me, and to really make matters worse, then she insulted God, Jehovah. There were consequences. She went off mad and never was able to have a kid. We had no babies. My male pride was offended. My relationship with God was strong, but I never knew how to include my family in my devotion to God. It was just me and God. I left McCall aside. I never brought my kids with me to the temple. Oh, I loved Jehovah, but I didn't know how to be with my family and Jehovah at the same time. It was there and there. Oh, that was one of my big mistakes, is to not lead my family into worshiping Jehovah together. But that was a grievous mistake. But let me tell you, it wasn't my biggest mistake. It was my biggest sin. Oh, it pains me so much to tell you, but I'm here today to help you understand what I suffered, that every sin is like a seed. And every seed that's planted bears fruit. And every sin that's committed brings forth consequences. You see, one day, instead of being with my troops out in war, I was getting old. They were not old, but they were experienced. So I sent them alone, and I stayed in the palace. And with everybody out on the battlefield, it kind of boring in the palace one afternoon. I went up to the terrace, and I stood looking at my gorgeous city, Jerusalem. Suddenly I saw a woman in her backyard right next to the palace. She was stark naked, bathing. And she was beautiful. She had a great body. And I said, "Don't look, King." And I took one step away, but Once a man's eye sees a naked woman, he turns back. And I tried to look away again, but I turned back again. I didn't understand it, but there's something in a man's brain that when he sees nudity, it's like an addiction. It's like too much wine. You take one cup and you need another, and then you take another cup and you need another. You take one look and you need another, and then another. Oh, I tried to turn away again, but I couldn't. Finally, she finished her ablutions and went into the house, and I watched her to the very last moment. Dinner that night, I couldn't get the images of this naked woman out of my mind. They were controlling my thoughts and my feelings, and finally I sent a servant to her house. And the order was, the king demands your presence at the palace. What could she do except come? Then what should she do except obey my commands to follow to my bedroom? Oh, it wasn't the bedroom. It was the bedroom on the other side of the palace from the call. I can't say that night was great pleasure because my conscience was overwhelming me. Finally, I sent her home before daylight. And I said, I'm the king. I can't do this kind of stuff. And I tried to forget, but I kept remembering her body, her laugh. But after a month of not seeing her, I began to feel I was free from that. Oh, I thought I was free till just a few days into the second month, the messenger came with the most unexpected and distressing news of all, that she was pregnant. Her husband was one of my soldiers, and he was at war and had been ever since I didn't go with the troops, and so he was gone. He hadn't slept with her. Now she's expecting a baby. My mind was in a whirl. I didn't know what to do. I thought, and finally I came up with a plan. I'll bring her husband home from the war. I will honor him. Keep him here a day. Let him enjoy his wife. Be home, and then I'll send him back. So her husband Uriah came. I treated him like an honored guest, a big banquet in the palace, and I told him to go home. The next morning, I was informed by my servants that he never left the palace, that he slept on the floor by the gate. I called him in. I said, man, why didn't you go home to your wife last night? This very honorable man said, how could I be with my wife when all of my fellow soldiers are away from their family, be it far from me, to enjoy my wife while they're risking their life for your kingdom, David? Oh, boy, was I angry, confused, disturbed. So the plot thickened, and I called him back for another banquet that night, and I made sure that the servants gave him more wine than any man should drink, thinking now that he's drunk and he's home, he'll go home to his wife. And the next morning, there he was again, sleeping on the floor of the palace. Such an honorable man. My devious mind, embarrassed at what I had done, distraught because of my sin, confused of how am I going to get over this. So I wrote a letter to my general, Joab, and I said, put Uriah at the front of the fiercest battle. And when it's at his worst moment, have the men around him abandon him so that he'll die on the battlefield. Me, the writer of Psalms, the lover of God, now sending a man to murder, to try to cover up my adultery. He died. Of course, I married Bathsheba. The baby conceived in adultery was born but quickly died. My heart was destroyed. You know, sin always brings consequences. Always brings consequences. You know, I wrote in that moment of desperate crying out to God because I had sinned so grievously and my relationship with God was so broken. I cried out, "Have mercy on me, O God, because of your unfailing love, because of your great compassion. Blot out the stains of my sin. Wash me from my guilt. Purify me from my sin, O God, for I recognize my rebellion. It haunts me day and night. I can't sleep. Against you and you alone have I sinned. I have done what is evil in your eye." I cried out to God. God is a merciful God, but the seeds I had sown have had consequences. One of my sons, by the name of Amnon, decided he was in love with one of his half-sisters by the name of Tamar. Amnon had some wicked friends, and they conceived a plot. Instead of developing maybe a relationship with his half-sister, he decided, "I will act like I'm sick and say I need Tamar's favorite soup, and she will bring it to me. I'll kick out the servants. I'll have her all alone." Oh, it was a great plan, and it worked. Because I ripped off her clothes. I raped my half-sister. That was the story that was told to me, David. I was so angry at Amnon that I wanted to grab him and say, "How could you do that?" Then he would have looked at me and said, how could you do what you did to Uriah and to Uriah's wife?" I couldn't say anything. Tamar, such a beautiful young lady, and now her life ruined. Amnon, my brother, now didn't want to have anything to do. My son didn't want to have anything to do with his half-sister. His brother Absalom, Tamar's full brother, was angry, devastated, and during the next months and year or two, he began to plot, how can I take vengeance on Amnon for what he did to my favorite little sis, Tamar, this gorgeous girl, now her life ruined. Finally, Absalom's plot was prepared. And with all of his brothers out in the field, and a big meal after a day's hard work, Absalom suddenly stood up and killed his Amnon. When I received the news, I was so angry. Absalom, how could you kill your brother? How could you kill another man But I couldn't say anything because I'd had Uriah killed. I had bloody hands just like he did. I wouldn't even talk to Absalom for 3 years, and he began to hate me, and he revolted against me, and there was a civil war. Finally, my troops began to win the war, but I told them when the chance comes, capture Absalom. Do my son no harm. Do it. Finally, they saw him. He couldn't run away because he was trapped. And my leading general said, enough's enough, and he killed Absalom. My son, the son I loved so deeply, even though he had hurt me so much. And I cried out and I said, my son Absalom, my son Absalom. Oh, that I might die in your place, my son. That's my story. I'm old now, and I realize that I never spent time with my children. I never instructed them in the things of God. I never formed them to be followers of Jehovah. I never spoke a word of discipline. Too many kids, too many wives. In fact, someone said about me, in his entire life, his father had never spoken once to him saying, why did you do this? I failed in my relationship with McCall as a father. But when I cried out to God in my 51st poem, I cried out in repentance with tears and a broken heart. Greater than all of my sins was the grace of God that came and said, you're forgiven. Me, an adulterer, a murderer, a failure as a dad and as a husband, God came and said, my grace is sufficient for thee. And when I cried out with tears of repentance there in my 51st poem, God's grace came and forgave me. And as a father, he welcomed me once again with open arms. My tears of repentance were wiped away with the laughter of joy because all of my sins, all of them, had been forgiven by a loving God. He didn't come back with a raised finger and said, now you're going to get it. He came and said, David, my son, you're forgiven. You're forgiven. I will not hold this against you. Not ever. Not ever will I come back with a raised finger and say, because you're now, no. You're forgiven. Now this morning, every one of us are just like David. We need that forgiveness. There are men and women here who are embroiled in relationships that aren't pleasing to God. There are men and women here who are attracted to naked people just like David was, and you can't turn away just like he couldn't turn away, and you scroll from one picture to another. Anger, bitterness, blame. But God comes. But God comes with open arms and with grace and with mercy. He doesn't come with a raised finger. He doesn't come except with open arms to say, come to me. I will break the chains of bondage. I will set your mind free. I will heal the brokenness. But you have to come to me, and I will come to you.